the hollow beneath the pines. When I received the invitation from my Uncle Tom to visit him in rural Arkansas, I wasn't exactly thrilled. I hadn't seen him in years, and our family always described him as a bit odd. Still, the chance to escape the chaos of city life for a weekend sounded appealing. It would be nice to breathe fresh air, relax in the countryside, and maybe bond with a family member I barely knew. The drive out to his property was long and winding. The sun dipped low behind towering pines, casting long shadows across the narrow road. When I finally pulled into the dirt driveway, the sight of Uncle Tom's house sent a shiver down my spine. The house was an old two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling and its shutters hanging crookedly. A large wraparound porch sagged under its own weight. The surrounding woods seemed to creep in too close, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. Uncle Tom greeted me at the door with a toothy grin, his face weathered and his eyes sharp. "Welcome, Alex," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. His grip was strong, too strong, and his eyes lingered on mine a moment longer than felt comfortable. "Hope you're ready for some peace and quiet out here." As I settled in, the silence of the place began to weigh on me. There was no hum of traffic, no distant wail of sirens, just the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Uncle Tom didn't have Wi-Fi, and cell service was non-existent. It was like stepping back in time. That night, over a dinner of venison stew, Uncle Tom started talking about the woods. "Been here for 30 years now," he said, staring out the window into the darkness. "These woods, they've got a way of getting under your skin. Folks around here don't go wandering out there after dark." "Why not?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Strange things happen," he said, his voice low. "Animals acting odd. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Sometimes people just vanish." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like a campfire story." He didn't laugh. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The mattress was lumpy, and the faint creaks of the old house made it hard to relax. Around midnight, I heard it, a low, mournful wail coming from the woods. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It rose and fell, a haunting melody that made my skin crawl. The next morning, Uncle Tom was already up, drinking coffee on the porch. "You hear it?" he asked without looking at me. "Hear what?" I lied. He smirked. "You'll hear it again tonight. It always comes back." I spent the day exploring the property, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. The woods were dense, the kind of forest where every path seemed to lead to nowhere. Despite the bright daylight, the shadows under the trees felt heavy, oppressive. I found an old, crumbling well hidden among the pines. The stones were moss-covered, and the opening gaped like a mouth. Something about it made my stomach twist, so I backed away and returned to the house. That night, the wailing came again, louder this time. It seemed to move closer, circling the house. I peered out the window, but all I could see was darkness. The next day, Uncle Tom handed me a rifle. "For protection," he said. "Protection from what?" He shrugged. "Just in case." That afternoon, I ventured into the woods again, rifle slung over my shoulder. I felt foolish carrying it, but the unease in my chest wouldn't go away. As I walked, I noticed the forest growing quieter. The usual sounds of birds and insects faded until all I could hear was my own breathing. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person, a figure standing among the trees. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't human. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it had no eyes, just dark, empty sockets. I froze. The thing tilted its head, as if studying me. Then it smiled, revealing a mouth full of sharp, needle-like teeth. I ran. Branches whipped at my face, and my lungs burned as I sprinted back to the house. When I burst through the door, Uncle Tom was waiting. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his expression grim. "What the hell is it?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He sighed. "Something old. Something that doesn't belong in this world." He explained that the creature had been haunting these woods for as long as anyone could remember. The locals called it the Hollow. It fed on fear, drawing people into the forest where they were never seen again. "Why haven't you left?" I asked. Uncle Tom looked out the window. "You can't outrun it. Once you've seen it, it stays with you." That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. The wailing came again, but this time it was accompanied by something else, whispering. Faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from all around me. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave first thing in the morning. At dawn, I packed my things and told Uncle Tom I was heading out. He didn't try to stop me. "Be careful," was all he said. As I drove away, the woods seemed to close in around the road. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the hollow chasing after me. When I finally reached the highway, I felt a wave of relief. But it didn't last long. A week after I returned to the city, the nightmares started. I dreamed of the woods, of the hollow standing at the edge of the trees, its empty eyes watching me. The wailing followed me, even in my waking hours. One night, I woke up to find my apartment filled with shadows that didn't belong. The air was thick and cold, and I could feel something watching me. I'm not sure how much longer I can take this. The hollow is with me now, and I don't think it's ever going to let me go. If you're reading this, take my advice. If you're ever invited to visit a relative in the countryside, think twice. Some places are better left alone. The Hollow House. When my Uncle Mike invited me to stay at his remote farmhouse in northern Montana, I thought it would be the perfect getaway. Work had been relentless, and the thought of spending a week in the quiet countryside, away from emails and deadlines, seemed like heaven. Mike had always been a bit of a recluse, but he was family, and I figured reconnecting would do us both good. The drive was long, stretching across miles of empty roads surrounded by endless prairies. I arrived just before dusk, greeted by the sight of a weathered, two-story house sitting alone on a barren hill. The house was surrounded by a grove of dead trees, their twisted branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Mike greeted me at the door with a firm handshake and a crooked smile. "You made it, Will," he said, his voice rough but welcoming. "I hope you're ready for some peace and quiet." The house was unsettling. The air inside was stale, and the wooden floors groaned under every step. Family photos lined the walls, their subjects frozen in time, their eyes following me wherever I went. My room was small, with a single window that overlooked the dead grove. Something about that view made my stomach churn, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. The first couple of days were uneventful. Mike and I spent the mornings fixing up parts of the old house, and the afternoons talking on the porch, sipping iced tea. He told me about how the house had been in our family for generations, and how he'd taken it over after my grandparents passed away. But on the third night, things changed. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was Mike walking downstairs, but then I realized the footsteps were too soft, too deliberate. They weren't coming from the hall or the stairs, they were coming from the ceiling above me. My heart raced as I stared up at the cracked plaster. The sound stopped, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. Then came the whisper. "Will." I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was faint but unmistakable, a hollow sound that seemed to seep through the walls. Against my better judgment, I crept out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was dark, the faint light from my room barely reaching the shadows. "Mike!" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I grabbed the flashlight I'd packed and made my way down the hall. The old floor creaked under my feet as I approached the attic door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. The whispers grew louder as I stepped closer. "Will, come." I should have turned around, gone back to bed, but something pulled me forward. I pushed the attic door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was icy, far colder than it should have been. My flashlight flickered as I climbed the narrow staircase, each step feeling like a mile. When I reached the top, I froze. The attic was empty except for a single, old rocking chair in the center. It faced away from me, gently rocking back and forth despite the still air. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The chair stopped, and then it turned. I can't explain what I saw. It wasn't a person, not really. It was a shape, a shadow-given form, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the stairs as the thing rose from the chair, its movements slow and deliberate. The whispers became a roar, filling my ears with unintelligible words. I ran, slamming the attic door behind me and racing down the hall. When I reached Mike's room, I flung the door open, desperate for answers. He wasn't there. The bed was neatly made, the room untouched. It was as if he had never been there at all. Panicked, I searched the rest of the house, but it was empty. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. "Will, stay." I fled outside, gasping for air, but the sight of the grove stopped me in my tracks. The dead trees were moving, their branches twisting and curling toward the house. and in the center of the grove stood Mike. He looked at me with an expression of utter sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "It's the house. It doesn't let anyone leave." "What are you talking about?" I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "I tried to warn you," he said, his figure fading as the trees closed in around him. "It's been waiting for someone else, someone like you." The whispers turned into screams, and the ground beneath me began to tremble. I ran, sprinting toward my car, but the grove seemed to stretch endlessly, the house receding into the distance. The last thing I remember is collapsing in the dirt, the whispers consuming me. I woke up hours later in my car, parked on the side of a deserted road. The house, the grove, Mike, everything was gone. But the whispers stayed. Every night, they come back, louder and more persistent. "Will, come home." The old house, the antique farmhouse, stood at the end of a long, winding dirt road. Its silhouette loomed against the twilight sky, a menacing presence in the heart of rural America. As I approached, I felt a chill creep up my spine, a sensation that had nothing to do with the descending night. The house was older than it looked, its weathered exterior hiding a wealth of secrets. The creaking floorboards and the musty scent that permeated the air created an atmosphere of unease. As I explored the house, the shadows seemed to dance and writhe on the walls, taking on sinister forms. In the attic, I discovered a hidden room filled with dusty boxes and yellowed photographs. Among the clutter, I found a diary belonging to my great-grandmother. Its pages were filled with cryptic entries about strange occurrences in the house, warnings about a darkness that lurked within its walls. She had written about hearing whispers in the night, seeing shadowy figures at the window, and feeling a cold draft that seemed to emanate from a specific corner of the house. As I read further, I discovered that my family had a dark history tied to this house. A series of unexplained deaths had occurred within its walls, and there were rumors of a curse that had been placed upon the property. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that something sinister was lurking in the shadows. Strange occurrences became commonplace. Objects moved on their own, doors creaked open in the dead of night, and I often heard whispers that seemed to follow me from room to room. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a scratching sound at the window. I sat up and looked out, my heart pounding in my chest. In the moonlight, I saw a figure standing outside. It was tall and slender, with long, flowing hair. Its eyes glowed an eerie green. As quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. Terror gripped me as I realized that I was not alone in the house. Something evil was there, and it was growing stronger. I decided that I had to leave, but as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a voice whispering my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Fear turned to panic as I realized that I was trapped.